welcome to Mount Kelly Prep Radio's 20 Questions with me, Toby Bowman. My 14th guest on 20 Questions is Philip Reeve. Philip Reeve is a children's author and illustrator. He is most well known for the Mortal Engines universe. He also did cartoons for many books in the Horrible Histories and Murderous Maths series. His Mortal Engines books are now being made into a film written by Peter Jackson and starring Hugo Weaving. Hello, which of all your books is your favourite?
Hello, Toby. Well, it's hard to say because all of them are favourites in some way. But when I look back, I think Mortal Engines I'm fond of because it was my first. There's a book I did called Here Lies Arthur, which is a historical novel, which I think is one of my better efforts. I'm fond of that. And one of my most recent books is called Railhead, and it's sort of the start of a new series. And that, I think, is my favourite at the moment, maybe just because that's the one I'm working on, so it's freshest in my mind, but I sort of felt it kind of came closer than the rest to achieving what I set out to achieve.
What was your favourite thing about drawing cartoons for Horrible Histories?
Oh, yes, that was my job. Before I was a writer, I was an illustrator, and one of my first jobs was doing some of the Horrible Histories books, not all of them. There's a very good illustrator called Martin Brown who does most of them, and I was like the backup illustrator when he was too busy. But they were great to work on because I like drawing and I like history and I like stupid jokes, so it was the perfect combination of all my interests.
What is your favourite thing to draw?
My favourite thing to draw, I like drawing trees a lot. I don't draw very much anymore. I'm not an illustrator at all now, and if I do draw, I usually wander out onto the moor and look for something to draw, just to amuse myself. And I find trees are the most satisfying. I like drawing people as well, but if you draw a person and it goes wrong, everybody can tell immediately. But if you draw a tree and it goes wrong, nobody knows. So that's my advice, is practice drawing trees.
Do you know of any upcoming authors who we should look out for?
Yeah, there's a writer called Dave Rudden, an Irish writer who wrote a book called Knights of the Borrowed Dark last year. And I thought this was going to be like the biggest book of the year and win all the prizes, and mysteriously it didn't. But I think he very will soon will come up with something that wins all the prizes, because he's terrific. And Knights of the Borrowed Dark is kind of, if you read a synopsis, it sounds like your kind of usual Harry Potter stuff. You know, it's sort of orphan boy who discovers that he's got a destiny and yada yada yada. But Dave writes so well, and his imagination is so vivid and so unusual that he just takes this kind of well-worn story and turns it into something really compelling. So Dave Rudden would be my advice.
Your book Railhead was shortlisted for this year's Carnegie Medal, which you won in the past for Here Lies Arthur. What was your initial reaction when you found that you'd won it before?
Oh, when I found that I won it, I was sort of disbelieving, really, because there were lots of other very good writers on the shortlist. There was a book by Kevin Crossley Holland called Gatty's Tale was on the shortlist that year, which I thought was amazing and I was sure would win. So, yeah, I was delighted but sort of surprised. And I was delighted and surprised to be on the shortlist this year as well, because Railhead is very sort of science fiction-y, and that's not the sort of book that often makes it onto the Carnegie shortlist. So I felt it was sporting of them to let me get on there.
Did you ever think that Mortal Engines would do so well?
No, not really. When I was writing it, I didn't even know it was going to get published. I just wrote it as a sort of hobby, the way that, you know, lots of people. I mean, I've been writing books like that since I was at school, basically, just to amuse myself. And occasionally, while you're writing, you think, oh, wouldn't it be nice if this could get published and turned into a movie and be a bestseller and stuff like that. But I just hoped it would get published, and I thought, you know, maybe it would sell a few hundred copies, and that'd be that. I go back to illustrating. So no, I was as surprised as anybody when it sold quite well, and now it's been picked up and is being filmed.
When you were younger, did you want to become an author?
Yes, I did. I wanted to be an author or an artist or an actor or a filmmaker or something like that. But I didn't really know how you got into any of those worlds. You know, I come from a very kind of ordinary background. None of my family had ever dipped their toes into the world of art or literature or further education, so I had no idea how you actually got to do that, but that was what I dreamed of doing, and the way I chose to do it really in the end was to go in via illustration. I had no idea how I got somebody to read my stories, but it was quite easy to get them to look at my pictures, so that's how I ended up being an illustrator.
What can you tell us about the new film of Mortal Engines, which is due for release in 2018?
Oh, I can't tell you very much, I don't think, because it's all secret. But I was down there. They invited me down to New Zealand a couple of weeks back to watch the filming going on, and it's amazing. There are three big sound stages at Stone Street Studios in Wellington, where they filmed The Lord of the Rings and King Kong and things like that. And they're filled with stuff that I imagined 20 years ago. It's quite extraordinary. I wander in there, and there are all these places that I made up, and people I made up are wandering around. So it was kind of wonderful, and I think it's going to be very spectacular. I got to see obviously a lot of Mortal Engines because it's very sort of fantastical and futuristic. A lot of it will be done with computer generated imagery, so I got to have a look around the art department and see all the kind of concept designs they're coming up with for all the scenes, and I think it's going to look absolutely amazing, but we have to wait until Christmas next year to find out.
So were you involved with the design of the
No.
set?
No, I wasn't. I mean, I haven't really had any involvement. I wrote the book, and then my publisher sold the book to Peter Jackson to make the movie. So I haven't actually had any connection with it. And he and his team are writing the script, so I'm not really connected with it, except in, from time to time they show me a script or something, and I go, oh, hooray, that's brilliant. But I suppose in a way I am involved with it because there are things like, well, I was watching a scene being filmed, and there's a character in it called Anna Fang who, in the book, wears a red coat, and in the film she's played by a Korean rock star called Jae, who is lovely, and she wears a red coat in the film. And as she was going through this scene, and the red coat really sort of sings out against all the sort of rusty greys and browns and earth colours of the set. And I thought, oh yeah, I did that. That was me, because I put her in a red coat in the book all those years ago. So I feel I've got some kind of, I've had some kind of influence on it.
What was Peter Jackson like to be around then when you were there?
He's very nice. He's very down to earth. I mean, I've never really met any other famous movie moguls, so I don't have anybody to compare him to. But he's very friendly and very ordinary, really, and just sort of chats on to you, and he's lovely. But yes, as I say, I didn't know quite what to expect, but. He's sort of like anybody, really. I think it's a very sort of informal kind of world, really. When you're making a movie, everybody kind of mucks in and does their thing, and he's technically in charge, and he's obviously very, very good at it. But he's, he doesn't come across as very bossy or anything like that, like you might imagine a film director would.
Do you have a favourite place to write your books?
I can sort of write anywhere, I think, and I have in the past. I've written things on trains and in cafes and out on the moor sometimes, but there's a little sort of outbuilding at our house at Widdicombe, which we've converted into a kind of a studio, and my wife goes in there in the evenings and makes music, and I go in there in the daytime and make books, so I mostly write in there.
Now on to my 10 set questions, which I ask everybody who joins me on 20 questions. What is your favourite piece of music?
Or does it have to be one? There are so many. I don't know. I'm not very musical. I have a fondness for sort of quite romantic orchestral things. So something like Elgar's Cello Concerto, probably. Equally, I've got a fondness for kind of 1970s things because of the age I am and when I grew up. So David Bowie would be my sort of musical hero. There are a couple of albums of his, Heroes and Low, his sort of Berlin late 70s electronic kind of things, which were a huge influence on Railhead. When I was stuck and didn't know what to do, I heard one of those records one day and thought, oh, okay, yes, I can. And that's the feeling I want in my new book. So I'm not greatly musical, but sometimes music helps. Prods you in a useful direction.
If you could invite 3 people, dead or alive, to a dinner party, who would you choose and why?
Well, I would have to invite Sarah McIntyre, who is the illustrator I work with on books for younger readers. And she is very, very good to work with because we do lots of events and things together, and I'm quite shy and reserved, and I don't really talk much. But Sarah has no such inhibitions because she's American and they don't have those sorts of inhibitions. So she just, he said tarring all of America with a McIntyre brush. But she can talk when I can't, so I just stand next to her and smile, and she introduces it to everybody. So I meet all sorts of fascinating people now who I never would otherwise, because she kind of goes blathering up to people at festivals, and we get to meet kind of Paddy Ashdown and Jermaine Greer and people like that. So I definitely want her to kind of do the talking. And then I would have to have another Sarah, who is my wife Sarah, because it would be unspeakable if I were to invite the wrong, one Sarah and not the other, because I'm basically surrounded by Sarahs. And then another person. Well, it's always difficult, isn't it? You're always tempted to say Julius Caesar or Napoleon or some fascinating historical character like that. But I think really people from any great distance back in history, their worldview would be so different to ours that it would actually be very difficult to have a conversation with them. They'd just spend the whole evening wanting to know how our phones worked and stuff. You'd spend so long bringing them up to speed that you wouldn't get much actual talking done. So I think it would be somebody, from the 20th century or even the 21st. Somebody I would love to meet and never have is Clive James, who's an Australian writer, and he was a sort of big TV personality when I was growing up. Nowadays he just writes, but he writes brilliantly, and he's very funny and enormously knowledgeable about a whole wide range of subjects, history and literature and poetry. I think he would be a fascinating person to talk to. So I'm going to have him and two Sarahs.
What is your favourite piece of literature and why?
It's like the music. It's very when you're young, you have favourite pieces of literature and music, and you have favourite films and stuff. And when I was young, Lord of the Rings was my favourite piece of literature, and it's still, to some extent, I guess it still is. It's clearly the thing that's influenced me most in my career. I've basically made a living out of liking the Lord of the Rings as a small boy. But when you get older, you start to have different favourites, all sorts of different things depending on your mood, So I have like favourite funny book and a favourite sad book and favourite poetry and favourite play. Books I go back to very often are, there's a series by Patrick O'Brien about the sort of the Nelson era British Navy. He has two characters, Captain Jack Aubrey, who is a daring sea captain, and Stephen Maturin, who is the surgeon on the ship, and they form this great friendship despite being almost completely opposite in every way. And it extends across about 20 books. It's this fantastic sort of series of adventure stories, and they sort of start out kind of playing by the rules of adventure stories with battles and things, but as they go on, they become more and more just about the friendship and about and they also have this wonderful portrait of the kind of the early 19th century world. Incredibly rich and detailed historical novels, and they're also very funny, which seems a strange thing to say, but they're some of the funniest books I've ever read. So those are books that I come back to quite a lot. They may not be the greatest works of literature I've ever read, though I think they're pretty good. I think they're up there, but they're endlessly rereadable. So I think they're a favourite.
Where is your favourite place and why?
Dartmoor is my favourite place, I think, and I don't know why, but I've always loved it ever since I came with my parents some weekend back in the 1970s. I must have been about 8 or 9, and we came here, and I thought, this is the place for me. And we went to lots of other places as well. They were very keen on sort of hill walking and stuff, so we went to North Wales and the Lake District and Scotland and Cornwall and places like that. But Dartmoor was always slightly above the others for me, so as soon as I was able to, I moved down here.
What is your favourite piece of art and why?
Well, the usual caveat about the favourites thing. I own a piece of art. I own a painting by a Cornish artist called Brian Hanscom, who lives down near Bodmin, and he paints beautiful, they're sort of very abstracted landscapes, and he does them in deep layers of pastel. So the colours are incredibly rich, and we have one which in our living room, which when you first look at it, it looks like a completely abstract shape. It's this sort of big red arch of pastel, and then gold leaf above it, and then blue above that. But if you come closer and look closer, there is a tiny church in the bottom of it, and it's with a little tiny snail going up little zigzag path to it, and it's basically a picture of a particular church in Norfolk, but it's also a fabulous abstract. So that's my favourite piece of art.
What's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
I think a few years back, an editor I know at one of the publishing companies I've worked for said, you ought to work with Sarah McIntyre, who I was friends with her at the time, but we hadn't actually done any books together. I never thought we would do any books together because she did kind of picture books and comics for younger kids, and I did more novels for older ones. And so it never actually occurred to me that we should work together, but I thought about this, and so I said, no, that wouldn't work. And then I thought, well, hang on, maybe it would. And I started to realise that we could work together, and we did, and it kind of became like a whole new career for me. And at the time, I was in a bit of a, I'd sort of reached a bit of an impasse with my own books. I didn't really know what to do next. So going off and working with Sarah was it was like starting completely afresh, and it was incredibly inspiring. And it's been really good fun, and I think it's been my favourite thing that I've done in my career. So that was the best bit of advice I've ever received, is work with Sarah McIntyre, which obviously doesn't kind of transfer to everybody who's listening, because we can't all go and work with Sarah McIntyre. She's a busy woman. But I think it sort of can transfer to other people, because basically if you're stuck with what you're doing, the best thing to do is do something different. And the best way to do something different is to work with somebody else and get, you get your ideas and their ideas, and the ideas meet, and hopefully they turn into new ideas that neither of you would have thought of otherwise.
If you weren't an author and illustrator, what do you think you would be?
I would be unemployed, because there is literally nothing else I can do. I mean, really, I'm just useless at everything. I used to work in a bookshop before I was an illustrator, and I imagine I would probably still be there if I couldn't draw.
Is that the reason that you started drawing and writing then, from being in the bookshop, being surrounded by books?
No, I've always drawn and written. I've always done both for as far back as I can remember. But I think that's why I ended up in the bookshop, basically, because I loved books. I was interested in books. But it was, yes, partly, I think, working in the bookshop, seeing all the illustrated books come in, I would think, oh, yeah, well, I'd like to be doing that. And sometimes I'd see them and I'd think, well, I could do better than that. So it was quite encouraging. So that's, how I ended up.
What do you think your greatest achievement has been?
Well, actually, I think probably leaving the bookshop was my greatest achievement, because I was quite happy pottering along there. I was only working part-time. I would sort of work 4 days a week in the bookshop, and then the rest of the week I would be free to do my own thing, my little stories and drawings and making movies and stuff like that. So I was perfectly happy there, until one year my wife and I came down to Dartmoor, and I thought, oh yeah, this is where I want to be, this is where I want to live. This was Brighton at the time, where the bookshop was. That was where I was living at the time. But I went back and I thought, I want to live on Dartmoor, really. I wonder if I could do that. And the only way I could think of to do it was to become an illustrator, because I couldn't think of anything else that I could do from the middle of Dartmoor, where there were no bookshops to work in. So I'd never really had the nerve to go and show my work to publishers and magazines and people, because I didn't think it was good enough. But I thought, well, I really want to move to Dartmoor. So I got together a portfolio of drawings and pictures and started taking them round. And really within about a year, I had a career. I was an illustrator suddenly. So and then within about another year, I was established enough that I could move to Dartmoor and fulfil my plan. So that still feels like my biggest achievement, really, to sort of, from a standing start, suddenly become an illustrator. That was, I'm sort of quite proud of that. But at the same time, I'm kind of annoyed that I didn't do it about 10 years earlier, because it turns out I was fine. I wasn't very good, but I didn't have to be good. I just had to be kind of regular. I just had to be reliable. Yeah. Reliable. You get your working on time and everything. That's what publishers want. It was all right, and it was there on time, so it was fine. I needn't have worried, and yeah.
What do you love doing the most?
Oh, I like walking on the moor a lot. Not in a sort of sporty way. I don't pay any attention to how many miles I've gone or anything like that. But there isn't anything much better than setting out on a good day and walking for a long way across Dartmoor.
Do you have a hobby or secret talent?
All my hobbies kind of turned into jobs, unfortunately. I used to like drawing, acting, and writing when I was a kid and a teenager, and I did all those things as hobbies quite committedly all through my 20s. And then one by one, they kind of turned into jobs because I drew for a living, and then I started writing for a living. And now with Sarah McIntyre, we tour around the festivals and things doing our book show, and it's very much like the kind of comedy sort of routines that I was acting in as a student. So all of my hobbies turned into jobs. What secret talents do I have? For a little while, when my son was growing up, he got into Warhammer. Do you know that? The sort of little plastic figures. And I had to paint them for him, and it reminded me that that's what I did. That had been another of my hobbies. When I was a kid, I used to love painting little figures, and the little figures they have now are much, much better than the little figures they had when I was 9. And I discovered I was very, very good at it. So I created a frighteningly good goblin army for him. It was magnificent. But then he went off Warhammer, and I actually did keep on going for a little while on my own because I enjoyed it so much. And then I realised that all I was doing was just stacking up this enormous hoard of plastic creations that were just going to gather dust forever because they would never be played with. So I stopped. But I think that's my secret talent, is painting 28mm weirdos.
Thank you for joining me on 20 Questions.
That's an absolute pleasure, Toby. They were very good questions. Thank you for asking them.
That's fine.